DJI just announced the Mini 3 Pro. Rumors were right about most of the specifications, but there's one thing that the rumors got wrong. Details coming up, but first I encourage you to subscribe and choose all notifications so you're kept informed on the latest camera gear, news, and rumors like the DJI Mini 3 Pro. The DJI Mini 3 Pro is lighter than the previous Mini 2 at under 249 grams, so this means you don't have to get it registered. It comes with an f1.7 aperture, which allows it to perform better in low light situations and can capture a staggering 48 megapixel stills. And for video recorders, which is pretty well most of us, it can actually perform a video capability that's normally found in cinema cameras, and that's dual native ISO. And speaking of video, the video specs are pretty powerful. 4K, 24, 25, 30 frames per second, and 50 and 60 frames per second in 4K, as well as 4K HDR. In 2.7K, you also get those same frame rates all the way up to 60 frames per second. But in 1080 or Full HD, we get a staggering 120 frames per second, giving us buttery smooth slow motion. Most importantly, it's able to give you that DJI Sin-like format as well as log footage to give you natural looking video. It also offers hyperlapse and gives you a 90-degree gimbal rotation for those people who still like to shoot in vertical mode. I've never understood this myself. I always shoot landscape because, well, my eyes are side by side. They're not on top of each other. And when I mount my television in my room, it's mounted landscape. I never rotate it to it vertically. Somehow with the advent of smartphones, everybody decides that the best way to shoot video is portrait mode. I've never quite understood that. So for those people who like to shoot portrait mode for TikTok and other purposes, the DJI Mini 3 Pro will allow you, it actually rotates the camera, the lens, so it's not using any computational processing. It's actually moving and rotating the camera, which is pretty impressive. But what really helps set the DJI drone products apart is its active tracking system. It's tri-directional active tracking, which is an upgrade over the Mini 2. And what this helps do is reduce the risk of you crashing your drone from flying around, because a lot of times, myself inclusive, when I'm looking through the smartphone to see where it's going, I'm not always looking at it in its space, and I kind of get lost a little bit. I stop seeing the trees around me, and that's when you run the risk of crashing it. So that tri-directional object sensing is very important. But those sensors also come in handy for other things. The sensors on the DJI Mavic 3 Pro, what they allow you to do is actively track your subject, which is really cool. You can do all sorts of interesting things, such as you can have your subject at the center where you track around it, you rotate around it, counterclockwise or clockwise. You can do pan or dollies. You can do all sorts of active or tracking of your subject, which is really, really cool. But what the DJI Mini 3 Pro does is allow you to center the subject in the center of the frame. So as you're tracking that subject, the drone will always keep the subject in the center of the frame. And that's very, very handy. The amount of times where I've actually shot some footage, and even if it's handheld, drone or handheld, the frustrating thing is sometimes I get back in post and I was watching the subject, I wasn't looking through the LCD or the viewfinder, and guess what? It's not, the subject isn't properly framed, and sometimes I'll crop off the top of the head or the bottom of the body in a way that I just can't use the shot. It just doesn't look right, or I have to overly crop to make things look better. So being able to track your subject and keep the subject in the center of the frame, I think is a really big improvement with the DJI Mini 3 Pro. The DJI Mini 3 Pro is very light at 249 grams, and that still gives you 34 minutes of flight time. That's a really big deal. Now you can actually go off as far as 18 kilometers as long as you have line of sight. But I think that's going to be a big problem. With 34 minutes and 18 kilometers in distance, if you've got absolutely no bad weather, if you don't have any wind or any breezes, you might be able to get about half that distance. And I've done this. I was flying over Lake Simcoe many years ago, and I went across a couple of islands, but then I was down to around 40%, 50% battery life, and I thought it was probably a good idea to turn around and come home, because if a wind or breeze, a minor breeze just started to pick up, I wouldn't have enough battery life to get back home. So I brought the drone down closer to the ground, closer to the lake, so there's less wind at that point, and I brought it home, and I just barely got it home with about 20% battery life left. So to be able to go out 18 kilometers, I think is a bit of a challenge, but still to be able to have 34 minutes of battery life is a big deal. However, if you are planning on getting this and you've never purchased a drone before, I do recommend getting the Fly More bundle. I do recommend getting at least an extra battery. Probably 2 extra batteries will really help, because a lot of times I'll get out there, you'd be surprised at how many times as soon as I powered it on, even though I checked it back at the house, it needs to do some calibration, or it might need to download a firmware or something, and that can happen. And sometimes I waste about 10 minutes or so on that, consuming the battery. So then I pop that out, put another battery in, and I do my flight, come back, make sure I got the shots, and then use the third battery to replicate any of the shots that didn't quite turn out well the first time. But what's a big deal about this one is it can actually fly for 47 minutes with an extended battery. But that extended battery pack is going to push the weight above 250 grams. So then you would have to register your drone. So what matters more to you? If you're already registered, like I am, I'm registered in the United States and Canada. So that means I can take that extended battery, put it in, and give myself almost an hour of flight time, which is just unbelievable. So I'm pretty excited by this. So how much does it cost, you might wonder? Well, you can't purchase it today, but you can pre-order it. And there's several options on pre-ordering. You can get the DJI Mavic 3 Pro by itself for $759, and that's US dollars. If you want to get the DJI RC controller, which is highly recommended, I would recommend getting that if you don't already have one. The total cost is $909. However, if you do want to save some money, you can go ahead and pre-order the DJI Mini 3 Pro output controller at $669, and the DJI Mini 3 Pro Fly More kit is $189 on top of the cost of whatever package you get. I think drones are pretty impressive. They're pretty amazing. I bought the DJI Mavic Pro a couple of years ago. Well, it's probably more than a couple of years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. Every year I take it out a couple of times. This year I've only taken it out once, and it was when I took my son out to the lake. He wanted to go on the lake. It was March. It was when the ice was at its thickest, and about a week later, that ice started to rapidly melt. So we got out on the ice. I shot my son playing around, and then I took out the drone, and I got some really amazing shots. And I just love what it gives me. It allows me to get what would normally cost thousands of dollars of renting a chopper to get that aerial cinematography platform. And that's what these drones are. For most of us, they're not racing tools. It's not about flying and having fun. Look at me, I can fly. Dad, look, I'm flying, which is pretty cool in itself. But once you take that footage and you bring it back to your computer and you see it for the first time, what you realize you've got is you've got yourself an incredibly affordable aerial platform that can shoot 4K up to 60 frames per second, HDR, 120 frames per second slow motion and 1080, and that's absolutely magical. Now my DJI Mavic Pro isn't aging that well. It can produce 4K video at 30 frames per second, but as I look at my older footage, especially in relation to the detail that Canon EOS R5 can put out, I notice that there are artifacts in the bottom third of the screen, especially if I'm flying over a relatively stable scene, such as a lake or frozen ice. Now, in the clips that I'm showing you, you might not notice that, but what I certainly notice on a high-resolution 4K screen is you do notice some of those artifacts, and that's why I'm considering updating and getting the DJI Mavic 3 Pro. But which bundle should I get? I'm not so sure. I'm also saving for that Corvette C8 coupe with the Z51 package. Actually, probably not with the Z51 package. With my age and my back, it's probably good if I don't feel every bump in the road. A car that does 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, or an aerial camera platform, which is, what, about 1/100th of the cost? Either way, I'm really excited about the DJI Mavic 3 Pro. Sorry, let me say that again. The DJI Mini 3 Pro. It's a pretty impressive camera platform. And if you're thinking of getting one of these and you've thought about it for many, many years and you thought, is this just a toy? Am I really going to get use out of it? And I'd say for most of the time, no, you're not going to get use out of it. But for those times where you do want an aerial view, or you're shooting in an area such as a bridge or some other scene where you don't have the room to back up to frame your shot properly, simply rise the drone up. And I've done this, even just having it about 10 feet above the ground, shooting my subject, backing up and giving me better room to frame it. And that's what's really impressive about this, is the options of having an aerial platform, a go anywhere, anytime, any place platform. That's what makes these things very, very significant. And the price point, it's considerably more than the DJI Mini 2, but considering what we get with it, it's not so bad. I just wish it could be about $100 less. Anyhow, that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to click subscribe and choose all notifications so that way you are up to date on the latest camera news and rumors. Just make sure you choose all notifications so that way as soon as I publish a video, you're going to be in the know with the latest news and information. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon. Oh, but what the DJI Mini 3 Pro does is allow you to center the subject in the center of the frame. So